the convenience of how people see us is convenient to them rather than to us in a way. And it's convenient for people to see us as the reason for their bad behavior rather than how that reflected upon themselves. And that, so sometimes we carry things like blame and shame and all that for actions that were done upon us. And then we unfortunately get a label for that. So sometimes treatment or even our own treatment of ourselves is more a reflection of how others, or rather a projection of how others people saw us.
How can a trauma survivor break the cycle of justifying the abuse around them and begin taking steps to empower themselves? This is a question that can have many answers. It is beyond complicated, and yet an important conversation to have as we try to understand how trauma can be created and healed. This week, I am joined by Dion Crowe, a certified emotional freedom technique tapping practitioner and owner of Eflowtion Support Services. Dion is committed to helping his clients heal, break free, and enjoy fulfilling lives. In this episode, we will continue our conversation and talk about how abusers perceive their victims or targets for their convenience, the fear of the unknown, and how it can get survivors stuck, the importance of attunement in treatment for trauma survivors, the role pets can play for healing relational trauma, and more. Hi, I am Raysa, a survivor of narcissistic abuse, and I have complex post-traumatic stress disorder, and you are listening to Hello Trauma Brain, a podcast where I share my experiences living with complex PTSD. My hope is this podcast can help destigmatize mental health and provide support to anyone diagnosed with CPTSD who thinks they might have it or has a loved one with this diagnosis. Quick reminder, I am not a licensed psychologist or mental health care professional, and this podcast is not meant to replace nor substitute the care of psychologists, other mental or medical health care professionals. If you think you might have complex PTSD or PTSD, please reach out to your primary care or mental health care provider. Any individuals and resources mentioned in this episode are not sponsoring Hello Trauma Brain. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed by this week's guest are solely their own and do not represent the views, thoughts, and opinions of Hello Trauma Brain and the host. This episode may reference trauma or abuse, and listener discretion is advised. Remember, you can always pause or skip this episode at any time. And now, let's get back to the episode. Hello, dear survivors, and welcome to this episode of Hello Trauma Brain. Thank you for joining me today. If you are listening on YouTube, a gentle reminder to subscribe and hit the like button to let me know this episode was helpful. Quick check-in. Peeps, having complex PTSD is so hard, and healing is not any easier. I am having a lot of grief coming up during my group therapy, which follows the relationship recovery process modality. And this past weekend, I went into what I realized now was not just one, but multiple emotional flashbacks simultaneously kicking my bum at the worst moment. I usually am pretty good at keeping it together in public, but I broke in front of people, and it royally sucked. Thankfully, my chosen sister came to the rescue, and I was able to enjoy the show I was performing in this weekend. And let me tell you, this stuff is hard. It's no walk in the park for sure, and the work continues. This week, Dion Crowe and I will finish our conversation. If you have not listened to part one, I will link it to the show notes for you to experience the beginning of this impactful interview. Similarly to other interviews, I am leaving the spaces in between for you to experience with us too. And I invite you to notice what feelings come up for you during those times where there might be an extra pause that you might not be expecting. Now, without further delay, here is the rest of my conversation with Dion Crowe. I'm thinking here about EFT tapping. People can book you for a session. They can do the work with you. Now, this sounds like something that once they've learned and once they've done a few sessions with you, there's things that can take with them. It's a new tool on the belt. And now if they're at the supermarket and they're triggered, they can think back to the stuff they've been learning from working with a practitioner like you. Is that the case? Is that something that anybody can do once they start learning it at other times, or do they always need someone guiding them through the process?
Back to the emotional hygiene, once you learn to brush your teeth, you don't need someone there all the time to so it's kind of like, I think it's good, like once you know that the points and the basic recipe and all that of how to do it, then you can do it whenever. No one's going to walk into a room and say, no, you need to be in it. And it's a fairly, like, as long as you're not driving or operating heavy machinery at the time, it's like it's something that you can always be doing, and there's no real toxic side effects sort of thing. It's the only side effect is you'll feel less stress. But it's always like sometimes there are issues that we might be aware of, but we don't either consciously know, or there's something, because we're activating the autonomic nervous system, the unconscious part of the brain. Mm-hmm. Or there could be just a little bit of emotional resistance, as far as like, I might know that the issue, but I don't quite want to go there, or I might know the wording, or no, I'm not an angry person. I don't experience anger. That's only for angry people. So this sort of thing, like that can be helpful to deal with one. And once again, there's different techniques within EFT where people might not want to talk about their story. And if you consider going to a psychologist or trying different psychologists, what do you got to do? You've got to relive that story all the time. Every time that you relive the story, it's just not a narrative, it's an emotional experience as well, because you're feeling that within your body. So it can be tiresome as well. And people might give up on that. So how do we do it without actually talking about it? You can even do it with coloring sort of thing. There's people that work with children that, like if there's abuse, like you can either tap on them or tap your points, or tap on a teddy bear sort of thing and show them sort of thing. So there's ways of doing that. And so yeah, you can do it by yourself, no worries, there's no problem with that. Like I was trying to tap on the finger points as well, sort of thing, which there's a whole bad choice of words, meridian of like points throughout the body. So it's just not located on the face, so there's ears everywhere. So but these points also relate to the face as well. So it's kind of like a double dosing. So, but you can also just squeeze the points. So if you're in traffic, you can just be doing this sort of thing rather than going into and taking your hands off the wheel. So there's different ways of doing it. So it's with everything. It's kind of like with the gym. I'm thinking of my gym metaphors, where it's like you can work in the gym okay, but sometimes it's good to have an instructor every now and again just to correct your technique in a way, or to show you different ways.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think I saw this. I think it was a Med Circle video. They had therapists talking in the video, and one of them said, "You can't see the label if you're inside the bottle." And to have someone like you, like working with you, like you will pick up on things that your clients kind of be doing that maybe they didn't think they meant anything, and you'll notice on that and be like, okay, let's dive deeper into that. So don't go ahead.
It's going to be like I'll talk it through for the like, because there's a video and an audio component. But say if you came in for a session and you said, no, I'm feeling great today, everything's great, it's like I'm not feeling stressed at all, and currently I have my shoulders raised up, sort of thing. So it's not the what you're telling me, it's also what your body is also telling me. So if you've got your shoulders up, you're not relaxed. It takes a lot of tension to raise your shoulders up. So sometimes it's like looking like our perception of ourselves is going to be different to what is perceivable to other people. It's kind of like, I'm not walking with a limp and you're walking with a limp, but because you don't want to be seen as walking with a limp, you won't even see it yourself. So sometimes the perception of ourselves is, it's kind of like perfectionism or yeah, I mean, if I use perfectionism, it's like there's a whole host of reasons why I can't get something started, and I need to deal with those reasons rather than getting it started. And if I get it started, that means I have to step outside of the fear and go into the unknown. So, but if I sort of said, well, it seems like you're dealing with some fear. No, I'm not fear. I'm not scared of anything. Nothing scares me, sort of thing. And so, until we start to address, and there was some element in the past sort of things. So it's kind of like a psychological defense mechanism. And once again, that defense mechanism there is to keep us safe. And that, but it's keeping us safe, but it's also keeping us limited. It's keeping us in a state of fear. It's preventing us from doing more. And I think back to something that you said is the convenience of how people see us is convenient to them rather than to us in a way. And it's convenient for people to see us as the reason for their bad behavior rather than how that reflected upon themselves. And that, so it's sometimes we carry things like blame and shame and all that for actions that were done upon us. And then we unfortunately get a label for that. So sometimes treatment or even our own treatment of ourselves is more a reflection of how others, or rather a projection of how others people saw us, and sometimes how they see us is a reflection of their own selves and that. So if they see you doing a great podcast and succeeding sort of thing, well, that can't be happening. It's like, I need to be doing that. So I need to cut her down to size sort of thing. So it's like, so I start trying to instill belief systems into you of like failure and all these sorts of things where it's not a nice thing. But so if we start to address that and sort of see ourselves different to our external environment and start to treat ourselves more kindly, where we're not so stressed up and fearful within our own self, it's like, okay, well, thanks for the input, thanks for the advice, but I'm going to listen to my better advice of feeling better within myself by separating myself between what you see as convenient to you and what is convenient to me. And sometimes with abuse, especially narcissistic abuse, it's what's convenient for the person, like that they are of use to me. So I will use them, abuse them, and then discard them once they're no longer playing the game of shining the light up my butt sort of thing, see me as this great thing, and that which is a once you're no longer of use, you get discarded. So separating your because it is a dependency, because you are getting something out of it in the sense of like you're feeling like you're getting the love when it's convenient to them. and it feels good and you feel worthy, and I'll just keep going. It's kind of like a drug sort of thing. I've got my hit now, I've got my attention, I've got the things that are just normal for every person. But it's starting to separate how they see you and how you see yourself. And once again, if they're always going to undermine who you are as a person, then that's going to keep you once again entrapped in their world of like abuse, basically, which is not a good feeling to have. So sometimes healing change, growth change means change. It doesn't mean staying within the same environment and feeling better about being abused. Is sometimes moving outside of that environment to have people that treat you better, or even just treating yourself better. And that can be either going it alone, but it's better sometimes to be alone than to know something of you do know, which is someone just telling you that you're of no worth. So sometimes how people perceive you, whether it's a stigma, whether it's a label, is convenient for them. And whether, similar to past memories stored in the hippocampus and how we actually, it's whether people are willing to even address their own emotional memory banks and update this knowledge about you that you are surviving within this sort of thing. You weren't just like going, oh, this is great, I'm enjoying this abuse sort of thing. It's like, so, but unfortunately, with most things, and I think sometimes it's the issue where it's like the willingness to address these issues is probably the issue that's preventing people from doing things more in their life. So it's actually that dealing with those uncomfortable emotions, I'd rather avoid that than actually deal with that. But it's that avoidance that actually stops the growth. It's just finding another coping mechanism. It's finding another reason not to do something. It's just so similar with perfectionism, similar with all these sorts of things, all these different avoidances to deal with something that is quite emotionally hard. But that's understandable because that's all we've known. But could we know more? Could we know better for ourselves?
Yeah, yeah. I I love that you're saying that because it's scary at the beginning. It is a painful process, and the fear of the unknown. I feel like that's the root of the issue of why I stayed for as long as I did in the past. Like, it was just scarier to try the new thing than to stay, because it was, I mean, as bad as it was, a part of me was like operating under this delusion that at least I know what I'm getting here.
Yeah.
And it is scary, and it's, you're so right, there's that avoidance, and there's also, it kind of going back to the freedom, there's a freedom in trying the new thing and learning something new about yourself, because a lot of the stuff that kind of gets wired into our brains is you won't make it without X person or Y person in your life. Like, if you leave, you're done. Like, there's no way that that life can happen after that. And to learn something new, like, actually I can survive and I can make it. It hurts. It's not like it doesn't feel like anything, but I I really love that you're talking about this, because it's scary as hell, and then there's also a freedom in having that new mindset and opening ourselves to the possibility of considering that maybe what I've been told about myself all these years is wrong, and I'm not these horrible things they've said I am.
One simple way to look at it is that everything that is unknown until it's known. And if you take it outside of like trauma or anything like that, there's no guarantees that your walk down the street won't take a drastic turn. There's no guarantee that walking from the couch to the kitchen will take it. There's no perceived script before an action is going to happen, sort of thing. It happens in the moment. So everything that you do has an unknown factor to it. I guess the limiting factor was the unknown based upon a past experience of what you did know that is limiting the potential of what is going to be unknown anyway. You can plan all you like to do something, but best laid plans go to waste. So it's kind of like sometimes those past experiences are those things that limit what you do know, because if you have the capability of walking to the kitchen sort of thing, there's probably the good chance that you can navigate whatever comes your way. But if you have that limiting fear, which is the survival thing, and the amygdala is part of our primal survival part of the brain. It's what kept us from getting eaten by the saber-toothed tiger. It was that thing that ran away to keep us safe. But if we're always perceiving there's a saber-toothed tiger between here and the kitchen sort of thing, then we're less likely to actually go there, because in past that happened. So sometimes changing what is unknown into known it's easier said than done, but that's that process, that's that journey, that's that learning to be safe within your body, learning to be kinder with your own thoughts, telling someone to be more happy because they have depression. It is kind of the end point of like feeling with depression, but it's very insensitive, and it's
Yeah.
very like it doesn't actually deal with the issue of how do I get to feeling more happy, sort of. So knowing that there is a process in doing that, and knowing that it is knowing that the what is what is unknown to be known takes that shift in being able to look into what is holding you back of the known. And what I mean by that is, yeah, it's generally what we know is what we already know. So what is unknown is always going to be unknown, but are we comfortable in what we already know? And if what we already know is fear, is that berating voice, is that those things, then we already know of what we know. And it's asking yourself the question, am I comfortable with that? And if there's uncomfortable emotions, would you rather be comfortable? Which does mean stepping outside of what we do know, which is telling a person to feel safer, even though it's a positive thing, but it's letting go of what we do know. Mm-hmm. And if what we do know provides financial security, provides all these sorts of things of what we've been conditioned to believe, then what we do know may have been just those little undermining things once again to your foundation of self, your belief system. Mm. So it's kind of like a two-way thing. It's like you've been undermined to disbelieve in yourself. Mm-hmm. So that is what you know. Yeah. And to step outside of that is to actually believe in yourself, to empower yourself. Mm-hmm. But once again, I can't speak a different language if I'm not taught how to go through that process and learn a different way of doing it. So that's right. But it's very hard to also do that with that emotional charge because that's what keeps you locked. That's what keeps you tense. It's like, no, I don't want to do it. Right. Is that stage fright, basically?
Yeah. Yeah. That makes so much sense, Dion. And I think I want to go back to something that came to me as you were talking about when you're working with clients and you're paying attention to things like where their shoulders are. Like, as you were saying that, I was like, oh my gosh, my shoulders are all the way up to my ears every time. You probably noticed it by now, but there's a level of attunement. That's the word that came to me. Like, I feel like for us survivors of narcissistic abuse, the attunement was something that was constantly lacking. It's because, we're getting told things that are off, that we're getting gaslit. You're seeing someone throw plates across the room and the other person is going like everything's okay, and you're like, what the f? But when you're working with a specialist, with a practitioner, it could be your therapist, it could be your EFT practitioner, there's a level of attunement that you offer in how you approach your work with your clients. And I think that's such an important piece, because not everybody in the field has that level of attunement. Like, there are therapists that have like the blank slate thing where you're telling them your problems and they're just like, they could have the same face whether you're telling them a horrible story or you're telling them a joke. And I feel like for those of you that are listening to this content and you're trying to figure out, what are you like, you're trying to figure out what could work for you. That's an important word for me. Like, you want someone who's attuned to you, who's paying attention, who might be hearing you say one thing, but they're looking at your body language and noticing what's going on with your shoulders, what's going on with your posture. Are you cross-legged on the chair? Like, what's happening? And I think that's such an important part of the healing process. And it sets you apart. It's anybody who's tuned to their clients in this way, they're different from a lot of the other professionals that maybe were trained to have that blank slate. Like, I'm not, I'm not trying to come at it like, oh, you guys are all wrong and what happened. Like, I usually don't talk about this on the podcast, but I did a psych major in college, and we didn't learn. I don't remember hearing I think narcissistic personality disorder was like one class out of the whole semester in abnormal psychology. We did not talk about narcissistic abuse, and most definitely complex PTSD was, I mean, that wasn't, Pete Walker's book was not even out back then. It was just not a thing. And that training, the training is lacking. And I think if I could get my hands in the curriculum, I mean, I'm probably the least qualified person to say this, but if I could get my hands in that curriculum and change the education I had, I would throw a class just in attunement, just in paying attention to
Yeah.
the client.
I mean, a few things I can say to that is um, attuning to someone's, I mean, there's all mirror neurons and all that sort of thing, like shared empathy and all that.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also where it's like you can observe behaviors, but can you observe emotions in the sense of how that person is responding to that? And I mean, a prime example was I saw a psychologist where, like, I've had a panic attack. I know what a panic attack's like, but went because I was talking about something that was stress when I cried. That was actually because I read the thing and it showed that I had a panic attack. And it's like, but he was able to bring himself back. It's like, if you're having a panic attack, it's very hard to bring yourself back to equilibrium sort of thing. So there's observing, and it's also where it's like being able to understand sometimes that what you're hearing is not what you want to hear, it's what the person is actually expressing. And sometimes that can be for a body language that they might be saying something, but their body language is saying something else. If you're
Mm-hmm.
crossing your arms and saying, yeah, no, I'm nice and relaxed sort of thing, and I'm not defensive at all, it could be saying, or it could be just simply that that person's comfortable because they like to be held. It could be a holding thing. So there could be different ways of interpreting that. And if there's a disharmony, if we're talking about attunement sort of thing, it's being able to be present for that person. But back to my misdiagnosis, as one of those was absence seizures, which is disassociation, which is escaping my body because there's too much experiences that are happening, and I want to go to that pleasant place of my brain whilst something is not nice happening within my body, and then I can come back to it, which is a disconnection from myself. So part of the process is to get away out of the way of the process to actually help the person connect to their own body, help them get their own body awareness. Because some of the things that will happen when you're tapping is you'll be yawning, you're sighing because you're letting out cortisol, your stomach, or the rest and digest, will start to gurgle and burp sort of thing, crying, these sorts of things. You're having releases. Some people will feel tingling, some people will feel different body sensations as their body starts to connect with its own self, starts to find its own harmony. And that, so sometimes it's not going, well, your shoulders are tense sort of thing, you're lying to me. It's like it's being able to go, I notice this, similar to there's a trauma therapy called somatic experiencing sort of thing. And it's like noticing sensations within the body rather than going, your shoulders are tense, because once again it becomes an ownership sort of thing. It's just you're experiencing tension within your shoulders. So
Mm-hmm.
it's being able to help the person find harmony within their body, and you're just kind of like helping them find their composure in a way, their emotional composure. So in a sense, it's kind of like the person is bringing attention to where there might be tension, but it's also the person starts to realize that, oh, similar to having that gut reaction sort of thing. It's like when something doesn't feel nice, or oh, noticing my shoulders, you start to notice rather than going, oh, I'm so tense, I need to deal with this because it's like, it must be my job, I take this tablet sort of thing. It's like you start to navigate your own experience, to start to feel into your body. So, and it's very hard to do when that charge is already fully charged sort of thing. It's very hard to notice that. And it's like, yes, I'm stressed, but what's going to be that tipping point? So you want to be able to help the person also find where that unbalance, where that disharmony is starting to happen, to bring it. So yeah, it can have really, I mean, people sometimes even after an EFT tapping session just want to go straight to sleep because that's how much tension they're carrying. It's just
Wow.
exhausting. so,
Yeah,
so
that makes so much sense. And I I did want to ask you about something else that I see in your content before I forget. But before I do that, I do want to acknowledge that I appreciate you sharing so much details about this mode, like this modality of treatment, because I'm gonna be honest. I'm learning a lot of new things here. I haven't done a one-on-one session before. I've only done a few videos online, including some of your own content, and I didn't even know there were all these other ways that you could do EFT tapping. And it really makes sense that, like, when I hear you talking about the yawning and all these like ways that the body is expressing the relaxation. It's like the body is going into a state that it hasn't been before for a long time when it's doing
Mm.
stuff like that. And before I forget, I also want to acknowledge that in your content, it's not just the EFT tapping videos. You also do intuitive chats, and you, it's almost like a podcast. Honestly, it feels like a mini podcast where we get, yeah, we get to hear about your life and what you're up to, and I find them extremely relatable. I was wondering if you could share, like, how is the experience from your end? Like, how is it helping you heal? Like, do you come to realizations as you're doing these? Like, how is it doing those chats for your YouTube channel?
Sometimes tiresome, depending on the amount of bushwalking I've been doing. But it's good. Like the intuitive chats, they were originally started off as because I realized early on that me just talking about a trauma might also have that traumatizing experience. It's kind of like watching the news sort of thing. It's like you're watching, it's like, oh, all this tragedy sort of thing. There's nothing I can do. And then you switch to the next channel and you got that charge in your body. So it was intuitive chats, and then it was tacked on to the end of that, the EFT tapping, which I'd then tap about what I just chatted about. And then I had an old friend that suggested like separating it and making the chats shorter. And I kind of liked it because then I could like talk about different things and do tappings about other things. And because most of them were like an hour long. So to actually be able to talk, I mean, it was similar to what we were saying before we went online, was like different to journaling. Like I've done journaling, and for people that do journaling, and you get benefit out of it, keep doing it. For me, there's a point where I was big into writing, but I could never really just write like this is how my day was or what my emotions and all that, because one, my mind can't keep up with what I'm writing because there's a lot of emotional turmoil sort of things. So how do I put that into words? And your hand starts hurting, and it's like trying to write it all out, and it's like you're almost getting pissed off at the page because it's like you just can't get it out in time. And it's like feels like your homework sort of thing, you're writing out lines sort of thing. So it could never properly encapsulate fully how I was feeling, but it is a process for me to talk about the experiences. At first, there was always that like, oh, like someone's going to like that guilt, because I was always brought up on guilt sort of thing. It's like, oh, me talking about this, it's like it's going to be a bad thing, even though I've cut contact with family and all that. It was something that I was hesitant at first, and then I thought, well, this is my voice and this is who I am and these are my experiences. I'm sure there'll people there that disagree and have their say sort of thing, but they weren't there in those experiences. So it's always just going to be their opinion.
Mm-hmm.
And for me to actually start to talk, because even with a psychologist or counseling sort of thing, you got an hour sort of thing. And you might just touch upon the actual issue in the last 5 minutes, and then you're going to wait 2 weeks or something like that, or that. So, in a way, it was kind of like me being able to. I kind of want to say explain my experiences, because my experiences were before that I wasn't allowed to have a voice. I wasn't allowed to have my experiences be known because it was an inconvenience to other people, because I was starting to tell the truth of what was actually happening for me, and people like even my GP, that was more the primary driver behind my misdiagnosis, because once again the psychiatrist re-diagnosis, which is credit to him, but it was the family GP. But if it's a family GP, it's my mother's GP as well, sort of thing. So every time you sort of say things are going on, they see you as the issue, not the environment as the issue. So to even start to explain who I was and what my experiences were in my own words was a cathartic experience in a way. And some of what I'm talking about is stuff that's a long time ago, and some stuff that I've already dealt with, and some of it is just recent revelations of just like, well, hang on, that wasn't me. That was like what I was actually having to deal with in that situation. It's like think like with the confidence and all that. It's like, well, no wonder I've got no confidence. If you've got constantly the environment around you telling you you've got no confidence, but not actually helping you to get confidence, like debilitating yourself, not actually liberating yourself. So
Mm-hmm.
it's like it's kind of no wonder there's no emotional growth. So those sorts of revelations start to come while I'm talking, and sometimes it's different perceptions, but similar, like what I said before we went online, is sometimes I'll go for chats or go for a walk. And by the time I've got to do the video, it's like I've kind of processed it in my mind, and it's kind of like I kind of don't feel like talking about this anymore because it's like I'm sure it might be a revelation for other people. It's in my mind. It's like, well, it's like, well, I've dealt with that now. So, I mean, it's not too helpful for other people, but it's helpful for myself.
Oh, that
I'm
makes so
sure
much sense.
internally they'll know.
Yeah.
Any videos that haven't been released, they'll internally get it.
Let me get a little bit of behind the scenes here. I, I'm curious actually. Now that you're talking about this, I something that I find with my podcast is I forget that I said something on the podcast, and then somebody will like I'll talk to someone like, oh yeah, when you were talking about being sick, and I'm like, I talked about. Oh, that's right, I did do an episode months ago. Does that happen to you? Like you forget that you did an intuitive chat on something, and then all of a sudden somebody comments, and you're like, oh, I forgot about that.
Um, if anything, it happens more with the EFT tapping videos. I think I've done a few on topics of the same topic,
Uh,
thinking, oh, this is a great new idea.
mm,
But when it comes to there's a level, I think, of consistency that at least I'm aware of that there's not a lot that I've said that I kind of like regret or like go, oh, I've changed my mind on that sort of thing. It's kind of like a consistent growth process, and I'm sort of like don't want to go back and delete sort of that process sort of thing. There's videos that I have deleted, but it's kind of like either been the old breathwork ones or kind of like just ones that was kind of silly or just sort of, well, at least in my mind, they were silly in the sense of like they really had no sort of purpose sort of thing. They were just there. So it had no message behind it. It's probably a better way of saying it. So, but if I look back even to way early when the videos, the message has been consistent sort of thing. And and I think just my like I haven't gone sort of back and go on like, it's like, you know, like probably, I mean, if I was to be truthful, probably slight adaptations of perceptions of things. And I think that comes from sort of also emotional charge. Like you could probably safely go like, oh, he probably hates like psychology and all this sort of thing because of like being misdiagnosed and that. And if anything, I have every reason under the sun too, because like even past that experience, I've had negative experiences, but you've got to look at it as like, is it a few bad apples? Is it the whole apple cart? And also, are you going to give up on yourself due to a few negative experiences? And if that was the case, then there's probably a lot of other experiences in life, sort of thing, where you've had a few negative things, but you've still continued on and it's got into a positive. So if anything, my perception has shifted slightly in like my emotional charge behind like oh, this is all that, because I see the value, I see the what psychology does. It's like I think it's just it needs that somatic, it needs that body-based point, which just literally just comes back to what you said before with the training sort of thing. If they can't do what they don't know, so it's kind of hard to blame people because they can't do what they don't know. So
yeah.
once again, if they had the training, I'm sure they would probably put that into place. And I do see a shift towards more trauma-informed techniques, or at least a conversation around it and that. But yeah, for me, it's like the emotional charge behind things, and even like sometimes talking about the past marriage and all that. Like sometimes I feel like talking about it, sometimes I don't. Sometimes it's like I kind of just want to move on. It's like the more you talk about something that's in the past sort of thing that you've already dealt with, it's like it's similar to, there's a video, it's quite a long video, but it's with Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, and it's basically a talk, and he talks about a lot of things, but he also brings up EMDR. And there's a lady where, because Dr. Bessel van der Kolk was against EMDR at first, and he was like telling them, it's like, stop this crazy stuff, sort of thing, wiggling your fingers in front of your eyes. It sounds like nonsense, similar to tapping. So it sounds like nonsense. But they did it anyway. It's like, screw you, Dr. Bessel. We're going to hand you back and do it. So the psychologist and the psychologist did it. And there was a patient that had experienced a car accident, this lady, and they did EMDR, and before it, she's in a chair like this sort of thing, like all stiff and talking about the experience, and like she was like very hard to actually get through the actual story. Then they did the EMDR, she processed it, and even she in the video was going, well, yes, this is what happened. It's like, well, I'm kind of sick of talking about it now. It's kind of like telling a story of the past sort of thing. It's like, oh, tell us when you did this. It's like, God, do I have to again, sort of thing. So it's kind of like that sort of thing. It gets tiresome to do it. Not so much that it's traumatic to talk about. It's just like, oh, do I have to talk about this again, sort of thing. It's like, I want to move on and experience other things in my life. So there's little shifts and changes, but I think there's also the importance of having a voice. And once again, people won't know of something if you don't share of it, sort of thing. People won't know your boundaries unless you are comfortable in telling them, this is my boundary, sort of thing, which is a learning experience. And it's also a learning experience to be able to talk about my past experiences. It's just, sometimes it just feels like nice to talk about something else.
Oh, that makes so much sense. Thank you, Dion. And a few things. I want to firstly acknowledge you, because when I hear you talking about how repeating the same story at this point, it's almost exhausting. That to me speaks about the healing you've done. Like, I think there's a part of the path for me where I was like kind of stuck in the stories, and I'm starting to get to a point where, like, okay, like, I don't want to relive or retell this thing another 100 times. And I think that speaks about your healing. And the other thing I want to acknowledge you for is the fact that you became a part of the solution. You know, if you would have told me, if you would have come on today and said, I had this horrible experience for 30 years, I was misdiagnosed, given medications that were wrong, that I can't even begin to imagine how those 30 years went for you. And you could have very easily gone like, and this is why I don't believe in therapy. This is why I don't believe in the field. This is why I gave up on it. I would have not judged you for it. I would have completely understood. But I think that what I'm impressed by is the fact that you didn't only just not lose hope, you still kept looking, you still persevered, and you became someone who now helps other people. Now you have your business that's dedicated to being a part of the solution. I just want to take a moment to say thank you, and I see you and I hear you, and that speaks about your healing too. And that, thank you again for doing that.
No, and thank you for your kind words. It is appreciated. And even just hearing your podcast and hearing you speak so eloquently and being able to give a voice to the voiceless in a way of, like, because it is like, if you can't speak for yourself, then it's hard to share of your experiences. And I think a lot of trauma, even if it is spoken about, it's whether it's believed in and whether people will actually give a damn, sort of thing. And I think when we look at self-value and self-compassion, sort of thing, it's to give yourself the value that has been devalued, and that, and sometimes it's looking at, sometimes we wanted love and what we received was the opposite. It was hurt, it was anger, it was probably someone else's trauma acting out on us, and that doesn't make it excusable. But the greatest compassion for oneself is to not berate ourselves anymore with the same abuse that we received by these unkind words said to ourselves. So it's learning to treat ourselves with more value. And in doing that, if we're coming from a place where we value ourselves and we set, I mean, even to say that I love myself elicited tears, and like I didn't. It was a foreign concept for me.
Mm-hmm.
To receive kindness is sometimes a scary thing for me because that was the thing that was used as an abuse.
Mm-hmm.
So these things, once you start to know that you are not what you received and you can actually treat yourself with more value, I think that starts to be shared with others. And I think there's a more of that same awareness that you see in your environment and you see in yourself helps you, I guess, better navigate others. And also, if you can have awareness of a situation and people themselves want to start to address that, then I guess if you've walked the journey, then you can actually help guide others, sort of thing. And I guess, yes, there's psychologists that will look at you. There's that very trained sort of analytical, which of the DSM can I classify them in as quickly as possible, sort of thing. That disconnect from the actual patient themselves, and that not willing to internalize the emotions of what's being said.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also being able to, I guess, in a way, if I was to cut it short, just the value that you value within yourself starts to see the value in others, and that awareness of a situation that other people might not be able to see because they only want to see the label of something.
Mm-hmm.
You start to be able to help once the person themselves wants to start to change. And I think that's the key thing. As much as you can want to change someone, if they're not willing to change, then you're always going to be trying to pull the blindfold on something that people aren't willing to see.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I think having voices, sharing of their experiences, things that, I mean, a lot of things that I see in the comments is, I resonated with this, I resonated with that. And I think if something's resonating with something that feels disharmonious with something and they want to bring harmony with themselves, it might be that tip towards something that wants to change, to start to value themselves and go, oh, maybe I'm not comfortable within this discomfort, and that maybe I want to start to feel a bit more comfortable in ourselves. And like, yeah, having the channel and having the podcast and all that is there's an importance of sharing of experiences, but also making sure that we don't get into a news watching of experiences and start to, if we're resonating with something and going, well, I'm definitely resonating with that, it might be starting to go, well, when do we start to address the thing that we're resonating with, which is an important step, almost a first step upon the journey, awareness of a situation.
Mm-hmm. I gotta sit with that. Addressing the thing that we're resonating with. That's good. Because I've I've been in support groups, and I they definitely have their place and time, but I when I started the podcast, I mean, I haven't. When I feels like when I say that, it almost feels like the podcast has been going on for 10 years. Like when I started the podcast.
1940. like grab my phone, we had to crank it. I've lost it around.
It's only been going on for like 6 months. It's only been 6 months. But when I was trying to do the podcast, I was trying to be intentional about that, because I agree with you. Like, I didn't want it to just be for lack of a better word, just trauma dumping. Like, I wanted it to offer something that people can take with them to heal. And it is not from a place of we shouldn't talk about what happened to us. Like, we absolutely should, and that's part of it for a lot of survivors, and for some other survivors that's actually not part of the process either. But I think that just being stuck in that phase and not doing anything about it can be a dangerous thing. And I like that in your content, you're offering an actual tool. There's tutorials, but there's also these times where people can resonate. And what I love about the fact that you're sharing your experience, and the reason I share my experiences too, is honestly, when I was going through this when I was younger, I thought it was just me. I really thought it was all in my head and nobody else was going through this and I was alone. And every time I've opened my mouth, somebody else goes, "Me too." So that means there's a bunch of us out there. I mean, I'm in the United States. You're in Australia. I interviewed last week someone from South Africa. Like, we're everywhere. We really are. And when we talk about what's going on, like, hey, I'm struggling with relationships, I'm struggling with friendships, somebody out there who thought they were the only person who didn't know how to do friendships can go, oh, so this is a thing. And yeah, it can be. We're not, it might sound cliche, but we're not alone. But we don't know we're not alone unless somebody's talking about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's like back to what I was saying about the complementary therapy. Everything complements each other, and everything is a communication, a co-regulation, a co-experiencing of
Yeah.
something. It's like I didn't get CPTSD purely by individual choice.
Right.
It was part of my experience growing up, sort of thing. So
Mm-hmm.
there was an interaction between me and my environment. It wasn't a complementary thing, but it definitely gave me something. So how we interact with our environment is going to be sometimes different depending on our flavor of, I guess, geographical location, and also, I guess, our societal beliefs and demographics and all this sort of stuff. But how it's kind of like if I went to a different country and mouth, like putting my fingers to my mouth, it's like you'd sort of know that I needed food. It's like I'm indicating that I need food.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a relatable experience no matter where I go, sort of thing. So
Mm-hmm.
how we do it in our own, I guess, kaleidoscope of perspectives, we get the same thing. That there's always going to be a different way of who we are, but there's also how we learn something is going to be like we all know what chocolate tastes like, or we all know some form of experience. It's just within our own little unique filter of our experiences
Mm-hmm.
that we identify with that. And I guess it's like if we have a lot of negative experiences, we might identify with those sort of things, which becomes a limiting thing. But when we share of experiences, it's kind of like, I mean, you could flip it on its head and go, abuse, no matter where you go, is the same.
Mm-hmm.
It's like,
Mm,
and how we
yeah.
respond to that, and we get that CPTSD diagnosis the same way, sort of thing. There's a ACEs test, the adverse child experiences test. It's like
Mm-hmm.
it's not going to segregate where you come from, sort of thing. It's how you respond to the questions, sort of things. So
Yeah.
it's kind of where I guess the difference is you can talk about an experience and be okay with talking about experience, or you could talk about an experience and still have an emotional charge about that. But or you can also not talk about an experience and find other ways of experiencing not to experience it. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, there's always going to be that emotional avoidance, and that emotional avoidance also has its worldwide. Is it going to be drug addiction? Is it going to be this sort of thing to actually deal with like the pain that's there, that's waiting to be addressed? When it's like that inner child that's waiting to be hugged in a way, and it's like once we learn to look inwards rather than outwards for reasons to look inwards. And I guess no matter where you go for healing, sort of thing, it's about they're not eventually, even if it's a psychologist that's not trauma informed, they're there to talk about your issues. They're not there to talk about other people's issues. I mean, I'm sure there's people that will go in and unload about other people's issues, but once again, it's a regulation between them and the other people, sort of thing. It's how that affected them. So it always comes back to ourselves in a way.
Mm-hmm.
And once again, how we receive the abuse is not going to discriminate against how we receive the diagnosis as well. So yeah, no matter where you go. And I guess once again, bringing back the awareness of the body, sort of thing, and awareness of something is like being able to bring back the awareness that we all probably suffer some form of trauma, whether we know it or not.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess it's once we have awareness of a problem, do we want to change the problem? Which
Yeah.
means stepping into once again that unknown, but it's whether we're comfortable in what's known.
Yeah. Yeah. I I don't know if I'm gonna get into trouble for. I don't think so. I've referenced songs before, but like I'm thinking about like Frozen, like into. I think there's a song called "Into the Unknown," Like
Oh,
every time you say
yeah.
that, I'm like, yes, like, and it's uncomfortable, but the unknown can become comfortable once you step into it. And I
Frozen in
wanted.
terror.
Can you say that one more time?
Frozen in terror.
Frozen Terror. Should that be the name of the episode? I'm kidding. Dion, I wanted to ask you one thing, and I'm not seeing Dexter on the screen right now, but for those of you listening, well, no, he's not there right now. So Dexter is Dion's cat, and he makes cameos on his videos. And I got to see him before we started recording the episode. He's missing in action. So even if you are watching the footage, you're not gonna see Dexter on the screen. But I wanted to ask you, Dion, because I don't have any pets right now, but one thing that I have heard from people healing from abuse is that having a pet can be so therapeutic, and people that struggle with that self-love, like they say that having a pet has helped with that, like especially with the unconditional love piece. How has your experience having Dexter in your life helped your healing? And yeah, if you can speak to that. You were not expecting me to ask about Dexter, huh?
Well, we'll be getting back in.
Where is he? Just
Um,
kidding.
yeah, he's definitely a distraction at times. But I think with Dexter, like I've always had a connection with animals, and
Mm,
it's something that uh, having Dexter in my life has been something where, I mean, if you're talking an attunement, it's like they know when you're upset.
mm,
I think like changes even in Dexter to myself, even leaving the marriage and that, he's changed as a cat. Because say for example, if I got upset, he'll just run. He'll like be like, as far as like teary, like crying sort of thing. They're just like you wouldn't know what to do. And like there's points where he'll be like very anxious in that.
mm,
And since leaving the marriage, because I mean, the ex-wife would actually come in and not even like acknowledge the cat sort of thing. He'd be like running up, meowing sort of thing, and like it was like she had some similar to me. She had an attachment, but where the affection was within the attachment was fleeting.
mm,
So for Dexter, like he was never a lap cat, and like I've got a chair that I've put there. It's actually quite comfortable as well.
mm.
Um, and he'll sit on my lap and he'll have cuddles, and he was never a lap cat. He would sit next to you, but he would always be on me now. It's like in the mornings, like he's on my chest, purring away, having cuddles. That was never really a thing. He would always just lie next to you.
Wow.
So like even like with the ex-wife, like he wasn't allowed in the room. I was like, why? And it's like, no, we got to keep the door closed, and cat would be outside meowing sort of thing. It's kind of like
Oh.
basically like, it's like the silent treatment sort of thing. So
Mm-hmm.
it's like for me, it was like he quickly formed a connection with myself, which once again, the cat forming a connection with myself was a form of jealousy of my ex-wife. It's like it's like
Mm.
anything that was attaching to me was not acceptable for her.
Wow.
But having him in my life, like I say a distraction because sometimes I will be super focused on something and his meowing sort of thing. It's like, oh, so I go play with him, or like just having his antics where he wants to, because he'll get this like confident strut where he's like, yeah, I can kick your butt sort of thing, walk in the room. He's like he thinks he owns the place, and he's like trying to beat me up. It's like go chase him, and it's like his little personality of like he wants food whilst you're already giving him food sort of thing. So, and
Mm.
he's kind of like my fluffy drill sergeant. Like I wake up early in the morning, but if I don't wake up on his time sort of thing, he's like meowing sort of thing. So it's kind of like having another personality in the life that I can love and be loved by.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the only thing I can also say as a somewhat of a, I don't want to say precaution, but maybe an awareness,
Mm.
is that sometimes it's good to receive love and affection from an animal or some form of thing, but it's also knowing that, well, also having the awareness of making sure that we receive that same amount of affection for ourselves, that we're giving ourselves that,
Mm.
because unfortunately pets pass away, pets
Mm.
or things happen sort of thing. And if you've invested all your emotional love and affection, this is the reason why you're getting up in the morning sort of thing. and something was untoward to happen, we don't want it to happen, but once life happens, then once again, it's like an emotional investment that you're externalizing into something else. So making sure, like with any form of relationship, that it's a shared love and affection sort of thing, that I'm not living for Dexter, or I'm not emotionally investing. Dexter's the reason I get up in the morning sort of thing. I mean, technically he kind of is, because he meows his head off, but it's not my driving motivation in life sort of thing. It's also making sure, like within a relationship sort of thing, even with a human sort of thing, that you're not giving your all to something else, that there's also give back, and it's also a co-regulation rather than like, this is my thing. So it's a nice addition to my life, and I love having him in my life, and he gives so much to me, but he wouldn't treat me well if I wasn't treating him well. So it's like, so once again, if I was, it's like any dog breed sort of thing can be an attacking breed given the owner sort of thing. So if you're treating it well, then they'll treat you well. So it's like co-regulation once again. So it's great to have animals in your life, but making sure that it's not your life, the reason you're living.
Oh,
So
that thank you for saying that, because as you were saying, it didn't occur to me to think about it that way. Like there is, and I think that's like that fine line between like anything in excess can be harmful. Like
yeah.
even the most therapeutic technique, like if you, like for example, having like a pet that's therapeutic, like if you abandon yourself, that's still going back to the fawning response. Like if you're abandoning yourself for any living creature, including your pet, that's still something that needs to be worked through, because we deserve to exist, and it can be a reciprocal relationship. And I love that you brought that piece into my awareness. I don't have any pets, and I didn't even think about that. And I do want to, I'm looking at the time. I want to be mindful of your time, Dion. And there is one particular question I want to ask all of our guests here at Hello Trauma Brain. And it is this: if you could go back in time to a difficult time in your life, what would you tell younger Dion?
That's a really interesting question. You know what? I probably wouldn't say anything.
Hmm.
And I know that might sound counterproductive, but I'm here for a reason. And if I went back and influenced that, I mean, if anything, I could probably open a door. I could like hold an umbrella. I could probably be somewhat make the process through time a little bit easier.
Hmm.
But whether me going back and saying, well, it's like do this and all that sort of thing, would I even know? What was like, it's like similar to change sort of thing. Would I be ready for the change? But it's like sometimes the worst case scenario is the inspiration for change. It's not what we live for, but it's that it's like, how do I know to go no contact with my mother at that age sort of thing. So unfortunately, as much as I want to go back and like embrace and say everything's going to be all right, and it's like, I don't know even now if everything's going to be all right. It's like everything is an unknown sort of thing. It's like I could be going really well and then something might not go well, or vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
So I think if anything is, I mean, if I had the ability, is to go back and probably, yeah, just be that stranger, because they probably wouldn't recognize an older me, and be that person that holds the door when they're having a bad day, or somehow influence their life to make the passage through time a little bit easier. Because I think given that I got to myself to this part and was able to process and go through an unbearable loss and grief. To go no contact is not easy. To leave a relationship is not easy. To go through everything, but it is what made myself. So if anything, I'd probably just, yeah, just not, I mean, have a good day. So something just to bring a smile to myself, to I guess make my day a little bit happier than what I was experiencing. But any form of advice, any form of knowledge, I think my younger self wouldn't be able to comprehend. And if my younger self, like say with like the ex-marriage, like she thought that I was telling her to leave her family, but she would always just do whatever I did. It's like, that's not a decision that you can tell someone else to do, because it's a terrible decision to make for yourself. And if I went back to my younger self and said, hey, you got to leave your mum, sort of thing, it's like, that's all I knew then. And to go outside of what I knew. So I think I probably wouldn't say anything. An act of kindness is probably what I'll do.
Thank you for that answer. And if I may, I wanna take that and almost use it for anyone listening. I want you to really take in the concept of being there is good enough. Being there is sometimes all that person in your life needs. And if you're listening to this and you're coming to this podcast as someone who has a loved one with complex PTSD, I encourage you to take that with you. Sometimes you don't have to know, or you don't have to say the perfect thing. Like, that's not the point. But that act of kindness, that presence, being there. And I love that that was your answer. That's the first time I've gotten that, and that really was thought provoking. So thank you so much, Dion. And as for wrapping up this conversation, is there anything that you wish I would have asked you that I didn't?
Yeah. Yeah. um, I don't think so. No.
Okay, that's good. That's good enough too. That works. So the last guest I asked that to, that was also what he said. He was like, I don't know what else. I was
My
like,
credit card details are.
Dion, I do, for anyone who's new to hearing about you, I will be linking your resources on the show notes. But anyone listening, how can people find you and find your content and get in touch with you?
There's going to be a new website launching shortly, or revamped website, I should say, eflowtionsupport But otherwise, check out YouTube, Eflowtion Support Services, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook. But yeah, it's primarily, a lot of the content is going to be on YouTube, because it's easy to post videos that way. And but for one-on-one sessions, definitely Eflowtion Support Services, you can book in there. And there's going to be new ways of engaging with the EFT as well on the website. So, and there's also going to be resources all about EFT tapping and even blogs and stuff like that. So that should be a good way of engaging, and also a good way if you're ever really wanting to go a bit more in depth, specifically with some of the issues that you might have resonated with on the YouTube channel, with the chats or the taps, to go a little bit deeper on that. Because yeah, if there's something that I kind of want to say feels good, but if didn't feel good, that made you feel a little bit aware and you want to go a bit deeper and feel a bit better in yourself, then yeah, definitely a one-on-one session is a good way to go.
Thank you, Dion. And just because I know I'm in a different country, because you're international, are you able to see anybody from any country, like the United States, Australia, any country can reach out?
I've had people as far as Canada.
Okay.
I guess it just comes down to the time zone when we line up. And I also do independent support work. So sometimes availability is dependent upon the people I'm supporting to support people with mental and disabilities. So mental health and disabilities. So yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. And for those of you listening, because it's online, that's how we're Dion is able to make it work. And no worries, I will be linking on the show notes Dion's website and all his social media, so you can reach out to him if you like and learn more about his services doing EFT tapping and different kinds of independent sessions that you can benefit from. Dion, I want to again acknowledge your work, your dedication, not only to your own healing, but to pass to others that ability to also feel better and heal through all sorts of trauma, abuse, and I mean, what life brings our way. And again, thank you so much for the work that you do and for your commitment to helping survivors.
And I also just want to briefly say thank you very much, Raysa, for having me on your podcast. It's hugely I'm very grateful for having the time and to share some of this. And I also just want to say thank you for having your voice and the courage to have your voice and the strength to share of your experiences and to be able to be, once again, that resonating light for other people to gather around, to listen to and empower themselves, and hopefully be that thing that sets them upon that healing journey. And once again, everyone steps on that journey at their own time and place, but I think having important voices like yourself and being able to go through what you went through and still be going, that ain't me, and I'm here to be more for myself and to share more of myself, is completely brave and courageous. And even though it might not feel it, I think just the simple ability to verbalize that which shouldn't have happened is incredibly important for everyone. So thank you very much for sharing of your experiences and voice and having this podcast.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you. And last thing I'll say to you is I'm also sorry that you went through all that. And I'm so proud of you for getting to this point and not giving up on yourself, because you deserve not only to have yourself there for yourself, but also to experience life fully in the way that you were always meant to. And thank you so much for the kind words you gave me. And thank you so much for joining us here at Hello Trauma Brain for this beautiful conversation.
Thank you.
All right, survivors. How are you feeling after listening to the rest of my conversation with Dion? I hope you enjoyed part 2 as much as I did. A few things. Since we recorded the interview, Dion's new website for his business, Eflowtion Support Services, is up and running, and it looks beautiful. I have linked Dion's website and all of his social media to the show notes for you. Also, Dion sent me the YouTube video he referenced during our conversation, which features Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, and I will link that to the show notes too. Please leave a comment and let us know how this conversation impacted you. In this week's Healing Invitation, Dion wants to offer you something to reflect about.
I think when we looked at affirmations, we can sometimes have that cringe feel sort of thing. It feels wrong to affirm that I love myself. I am here for myself. I trust of myself. And I encourage you to look at that and go, is that the voices that were told to me, or is that a part of me? And I think when we start to believe and empower in ourselves, that love, that compassion will start to foster and grow. So knowing that you are not your experiences, knowing that who you are as a person is not what happened to you, it's what you choose to be from that. And sometimes knowing what we received is better in the sense of growing from that. We don't want to be what we received. We want to be something more. So knowing of the opposite, knowing of that negative experience will help to start growing that positive experience, because we don't want to stay within that negativity of what happened to us. We want to start affirming that we are more than what happened to us. And it was unfortunate, but we want to bring a little bit more fortune within our lives by not believing in the non-affirming voices. We want to start affirming. So even though it might feel cringeworthy, knowing that that cringeworthy might be a belief that was said to us. So you do deserve love. You do deserve kindness. You do deserve trust within yourself. You do deserve more abundance in your life. You do deserve to be there for yourself. And do deserve to know that even though there's fear, you are more than what's in that fear. You're beyond that fear by moving through it. So starting to believe a little bit more in yourself and starting to empower yourself, and just knowing it's a process and being kind to yourself in that process.
All right, peeps. I hope you find this affirmation from Dion helpful. Please let us know how this week's healing invitation goes if you choose to accept it. Before we wrap up this episode, all music and production is courtesy of yours truly. Also, I want to share a few ways you can help support this podcast. You can subscribe and leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, or the platform you are using to listen. Share this episode with anyone you can think can benefit from this content. Follow Hello Trauma Brain on Instagram with the handle at Hello Trauma Brain. Subscribe to the Hello Trauma Brain YouTube channel and hit the notification bell to be the first to know when I post a new episode. And you can make a donation by getting me a coffee through the official bio site. No worries, all links will be provided in the show notes. Thank you for joining me and Dion today. We hope you found this episode helpful. I wish you the best as you begin to find freedom to become your full self. It is time for our farewell affirmations. You are welcome to repeat after me. I am enough. I am lovable. And I deserve to heal. I wish you a gentle week and thank you for listening.